Do you think it's fair dealing to be full of bullshit and get the taxpayers to take the bait?
During a hearing this week, Democratic Representative Katie Porter tore into another corrupt executive. This time, Nick Howley, an executive of defense contractor TransDigm. So I got a couple of clips here to show you, and they are fantastic. Once again, Katie Porter does an amazing job.
Do you recognize these words? Quote, "We didn't have to give up a dime. I'm just full of BS." And they took the bait.
I don't have knowledge or recall it.
Okay, that is from a TransDigm exhibit. You don't need to see it, but that is from a TransDigm, that is from an exhibit in this investigation. That is your salespeople talking about a deal that they just made with the military for jet engine parts in 2018. We don't have to give up a dime. Your salesperson said, "I'm just full of BS." And they, being the DOD and taxpayers, took the bait. Mr. Howley, does TransDigm have a code of business ethics and conduct?
Oh, as any company does, of course we do. It's on our website.
Okay, does that code require fair dealing?
Yes, and it says what it says, but of course it requires fair dealing.
Do you think it's fair dealing to be full of bullshit and get the taxpayers to take the bait?
I don't have a comment on that. I'm not familiar with the situation. I don't know what it is. I don't know who the person is. I don't know them. I just can't comment on it.
Mr. Howley, will you find out who that person is?
I presume you have it. You have an email. I presume you have it. I don't know who it is. I don't know.
Mr. Howley, as executive chair of the board, being paid $68 million, when a typical board member of a Fortune 100 company receives $319,000. I mean, here is the typical board member of a Fortune 100 company. See this flat line? You can't even see it. Here's you. For $68 million, you need to enforce your company's code of business ethics.
All right, so I have a second clip coming up, as well as a little more information as to why Katie Porter is such an important voice and an important example for the progressive movement. But before I get there, this is just incredible. Once again, Katie Porter does a fantastic job just showcasing how these massive corporations, in this case a defense contractor, screws taxpayers. So this is well documented. TransDigm reaped $21 million in excess profits, Watchdog says. So TransDigm Group, Inc., one of the Pentagon's largest suppliers of spare parts, was paid at least $20.8 million in excess profit on 105 parts from early 2017 to mid-2019, according to a 2-year inquiry into the company's business model by the Pentagon's Inspector General. There is an incredible amount of waste in the Pentagon. And this is just really one tiny example. 21 million honestly sounds small to me compared to what has come out before in terms of how much the Pentagon has wasted or just lost money. But it gives you a very specific example into how this kind of money is wasted. And generally here, when you get to one example like Afghanistan, who won Afghanistan? This is from the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. Private contractors. So the U.S. military spent $14 trillion. This is why I said 20 million is low. Spent $14 trillion during 2 decades of war. Those who benefited range from major manufacturers to entrepreneurs. That's who won. Americans lost. People in Afghanistan lost. Who won? Defense contractors. Now let me get to this next clip where Katie Porter, once again, just does a fantastic job.
Have you ever told staff that it is wrong to charge taxpayers lower per unit prices on higher volume orders? In other words, when we all know when we buy in bulk on Amazon, it's cheaper per unit. Has TransDigm ever told its employees that it is wrong to charge taxpayers lower per unit prices on higher volume orders?
Not that I have knowledge of or recall.
Okay, Mr. Howley, I'm introducing, here is an exhibit. This is Core Doc TDG 00034189. It's displayed on the screen so you can see it. More volume equals lower price. What does it say in big purple all cap letters? Can you read that for me?
The word's wrong.
Wrong. So would you like to modify your answer? Has TransDigm ever told staff, in light of seeing this exhibit, has TransDigm ever told its staff that it is wrong to charge taxpayers lower per unit prices on higher volume orders?
I don't know what that is. I suspect it's out of context somewhere. I suspect it's something done by
Well,
one of our
Hawley,
operating businesses at one time. I simply don't know.
well, Mr. Hawley, for $68 million a year, you need to know what's going on in your company. That's your annual salary in your retirement. In your retirement.
Another incredible job. I'll get to that in a second. Another incredible job by Katie Porter here. There's a freaking PowerPoint of them telling their salespeople how to screw taxpayers. It's amazing. So God. And really, this is an issue with capitalism generally. So it's not just this one company. It's not, just several companies. This is the issue with capitalism. The need to want more and more and more and more. And if you're going to get away with it, then you're going to do it. So they knew they can get away with it. That's why they were doing it. But let me show you why Katie Porter is a very important example to the Democratic Party in general in terms of her seat and how she won. So Katie Porter in 2018, flipped a longtime Republican district in Orange County. The first Democrat elected in that county ran as a progressive. Now, understand why she was able to win. Because the Democratic Party establishment thought, oh, this seat has been Republican its entire time. We're not going to waste money. We're not going to waste any time on this seat, whatever. So Katie Porter was free to run as she wanted to, as a progressive, won that way without really being challenged by the Democratic Party establishment in the primary, so was able to win the primary to become the nominee to then go on to defeat the Republican. So anytime you hear the media point out, oh, but this Democrat was progressive and they didn't win their primary, yeah, because there was usually, in most cases, those seats are gain a lot of attention, and the Democratic Party establishment puts a lot of money into it. They have their own candidate. And for example, Nina Turner. So there was a lot of attention on her race. So in the primary, she lost the primary because a ton of corporate money and Republican money, by the way, was poured into that race against Nina Turner. So when that happens, yes, it is very hard to overcome because money buys attention. It buys you ads. It buys you basically name recognition is everything when it comes to these sorts of primaries. But if you are running unopposed and you're able to run how you want to run and you win that primary, you will win when you are able to distinguish yourself differently from the Republican. So in many of these races, Democrats lose them against Republicans because they are running these corporate candidates. They're running these very vague, boring candidates against a Republican, someone who's essentially a Republican light, but running as a Democrat. And they lose that race because conservatives are going to vote for Republicans anyways, and Democrats are not going to be excited to vote for that person. But if you have a clear distinction in how you're running, what you're fighting for, you actually have your own voice, you clearly support certain issues that are popular, like, say, Medicare for All, which Katie Porter supports, then you are able to distinguish yourself. You're able to stand out and get the kind of support that you need in order to actually win against a Republican, and in this case, flip a deeply red district. But Democrats will never acknowledge this because ultimately, at least Democratic leadership won't acknowledge this, or the media, because their interests are corporate interests. So they rather have the progressive Democrat lose against a Republican than have a progressive Democrat win that seat. It's always going to be an issue, but this is why it is very important to be able to grow these sorts of numbers, have more Katie Porters in Congress. Whenever there's a primary is the most important part of any race for the Democratic Party, or I should say for progressives, because that is where the real battle is won. If you can get through a primary, then ultimately, in many cases, the actual general election is easier for them. If they can get through a primary against a heavily funded candidate, a Democratic Party establishment candidate, then they have a better chance at winning against a Republican, because at that point, they're able to actually stand out and fight for these issues that people actually support. So Katie Porter is just a great example of that. And you see, once again, exactly why.